NATO chief says attack reflects Putin's mistake. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said the Russian military briefing showed President Putin's offensive against Ukraine had been reversed. Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin averted Putin's biggest threat to power in nearly 3 decades by canceling plans to march in Moscow on Saturday night. But the remaining question is the future of the duo. Germany says it plans to deploy about 4,000 in Lithuania to support NATO's eastern flank against Russian aggression. True stories. Putin faces historic threat due to Russia's weak energy. Wagner detachment in focus. Putin's defense advisor military. Germany plans to permanently deploy 4,000 armies in Lithuania for 14L All Army 41. Putin. Which team is Russian Wagner? Why was he accused of treason? All time. CET. Putin addresses the leaders of Iran and Qatar. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said in a phone call with Putin that he fully supports the Russian leader. Putin also met with Emir of Qatar Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Ukraine wants more weapons after Russian diversion. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba asked EU countries to supply Ukraine with more weapons and ammunition against Russia, saying that the escape of Wagner's mercenaries indicates the weakness of Putin and his government. Urged its EU partners to tighten sanctions on Russia's nuclear sector, digital technology, diamond sales, maritime logistics and finance. Rubles at 15-month low. The ruble temporarily fell nearly 3% against the dollar on Monday, its biggest loss this year after Prigozhin's departure posed the biggest threat to the Putin administration in nearly 25 years. At 1:01 p.m., the Russian currency lost value and was up 0.1% to trade at 84.59 against the dollar. In Moscow, stocks fell, erasing some of their gains in recent months and retreating from pre-war levels. German troops ready for Lithuania. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius says Germany is ready to deploy 4,000 people in Lithuania to support NATO in the east against Russian aggression. The government of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz had previously said that the role would be transferred to the German army. Pistorius said the situation in Russia seemed unstable after Prigozhin's escape, reinforcing Germany's commitment to the stability of the Baltic states. NATO call on Russia's internal situation. Stoltenberg says NATO is monitoring the situation in Russia. What happened this weekend is an internal problem for Russia and further proof of President Putin's biggest mistake, he told reporters in Vilnius. Stoltenberg added that organizations continue to monitor the situation in Belarus while penalizing. Russia has announced that it will send nuclear weapons there. He added that NATO has found no indication that Russia plans to use such weapons. Lithuania seeks support from the eastern flank. Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabriel Landsbergis said that NATO should consider how to strengthen its eastern flank after the new development in Russia. He said Russia is an unknown neighbor and that, for countries bordering Belarus, Russia would be in a vulnerable position at risk. Opposition says Prigozhin could threaten Belarus. Exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya said Prigozhin could move to Belarus, posing a new threat to the country's freedom and security of NATO neighbors. If Prigozhin comes to Belarus with his terrorists, he will also threaten our neighbors, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Tsikhanouskaya told Bloomberg TV. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin said on Saturday that he launched a so-called anti-terrorism campaign. Special defenses opened at the beginning of the Wagner Group offensive were also removed in the Moscow and Voronezh regions. Shoigu visits the Ukrainian front line. Russian Technology Minister Sergei Shoigu visited the Ukrainian front line and talked about the formation of the Russian armed forces in the West, Interfax reported. For the first time since the Prigozhin coup, which demanded the dismissal of Shoigu and Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov, the ministry disclosed the whereabouts of Shoigu. According to RIA Novosti, no specific time was mentioned in the statement. While diplomats come together, China supports Russia for national security. He said he did not consider leaving Lugansk, where the main army of the Wagner Group was focused. From what I understand, they haven't completed the initial job and deal, and they have no vision for the new cargo, he said in an interview. Since Wagner's organization is more important and capable of fighting, it is necessary to wait and evaluate the possibility of a change in the Russian army, he said. We follow the situation in Russia. The events of this weekend are an internal problem for Russia, and prove once again the great mistake of President Putin by illegally annexing Crimea and starting a war in Ukraine. Visited Russia. Wagner's soldier, we're still monitoring the situation in Belarus, Stoltenberg said after Russia sent nuclear missiles to Belarus earlier this month, which will host a NATO meeting next month, just days after the group's failed attack on the Kremlin. We condemn Russia's statement to surrender nuclear weapons. It is a crime and irresponsible, Stoltenberg said. We have seen no signs that Russia is planning to use nuclear weapons, but NATO remains cautious. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda also attended the Vilnius press conference with Stoltenberg. The events that took place in Russia last week showed the instability of the Kremlin government. He told reporters that canceling the Wagner rebellion could affect security in the region. The formation of the Wagner Group in Belarus could turn into something else. NATO Secretary General. Thank you very much, Lula, for hosting me. It's good to see you again. Rula Khalif. Glad you're here. I will jump into it. As I said in the introduction, I was in Kiev a few weeks ago and was impressed by the self-confidence of the Ukrainians. It's not just their stamina, but their trust. Now they're talking about winning next year's war and reclaiming all their land. And it's not just the area since February 24th. So I ask you, do you think we will at least see a return to February 24th next year? NATO Secretary General. First of all, we must understand that war is difficult to predict. NATO's prediction of invasion was very accurate. In fact, over a year ago, we announced and shared more last fall. Months before the invasion, what will happen? Russia is planning and preparing an all-out attack on Ukraine. Therefore, when there was an invasion, we made all our preparations, created a defense system and sent thousands of soldiers to the east of the Union. We started to give more support to Ukraine. What we see now is that Russia is trying to open this war, at least for a short time, in order to rebuild, repair, and regroup. Then try to make a bigger attack next spring. So what we're doing is supporting Ukraine's right to self-defense. Ukraine is defending its country, and NATO allies and partners have provided unprecedented support to Ukrainians in these efforts. Rula Khalif. This freezing is what worries Ukrainians the most. Because of what they think will happen eventually, the longer this freeze goes on, the more tired the sun gets. Are you worried about that too? NATO Secretary General. I think we should understand that President Putin made two big mistakes when he decided to invade Ukraine. The first is the incredible courage and valor of the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership represented by President Zelensky. But he also underestimated the strength of NATO friends and partners in our commitment to stand by and support Ukraine. NATO allies have supported Ukraine for years, especially since 2014. In particular, allies like the US, Canada, and the UK are training the Ukrainian military to make it bigger, stronger, and better than it was in February 2022, when Russia first invaded in 2014. What we've seen over the years, and especially since the invasion, is that if friends are ready to support Ukraine, because they know that if Putin wins, it will be a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but we will have it for all of them. Very heavy. This will make NATO allies more vulnerable and the world more dangerous, so we cannot let President Putin win. Rula Khalif. So let me ask you this question. NATO members. Given the current conflict situation, should NATO members be willing to provide offensive weapons such as tanks and advanced aircraft to allow the Ukrainian military to break through the conflict without making Russia useful? NATO Secretary General. NATO allies have provided and are providing unprecedented military assistance to Ukraine in the process today. The allies provided armored vehicles, main combat vehicles, advanced air defense systems, and a variety of different weapons. But I cannot talk about the details of the system we are considering now. For example, we have advanced HIMARS systems, we have good air defense equipment like NASAMS, or we have Krotal and RSTs from Germany. So yes, we always think about what we should have. However, the important thing is to ensure that the existing machines work effectively with ammunition, spare parts, and all the necessary supports. Rula Khalif. You should have seen and perhaps learned what happened yesterday when drones were used to attack the Russian army. Can you tell us more about these drones? Did you know that Ukrainians make these drones? NATO Secretary General. I don't know any more about this particular case. But I can say that we see Ukraine defending itself. We need to understand this in a broader context. Rula Khalif. We hear more and more that negotiations should be started between Ukraine and Russia. This made the Ukrainians very nervous. It was not immediately clear what Russia's position was.